Good day, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Well, in a minute, we'll get there. I'm so glad that you're here with us live. Before we actually start the podcast, and just a couple things for you, we're so glad that you're here, and I'll introduce our guest in a sec. If this is your first time with us, because we're doing this at a slightly different time of day, we are so glad that you're here, whatever social channel you're on. I hope that you'll start by saying hello and telling us where you are in the comments. I'll be able to see those. And while you're here, I would like you to imagine that you're just joining my guest and I for a cup of coffee or tea or the beverage of your choice, depending on the time of day in which you're with us. I hope that you'll share your questions and your comments and your ideas, because that'll make for a better, more engaging conversation, and then ultimately and eventually for a better podcast as well. So if you didn't know, this will eventually be on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, but none of the stuff I've just said will be there. So what I'm going to do in just a second is do a countdown, which is where we'll actually start the podcast recording. And I'll be right back with you to kick us off. So glad that you're here. So we'll start in 3, 2, 1. Do you deal with information overload? Do you have trouble consuming what you want and need to consume? Do you have trouble with remembering and accessing the information that you need? I mean, ultimately, do you believe that you could make better decisions and have greater progress if you had answers to these questions? If so, you're absolutely in the right place. Welcome to another live episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. And now, if you're listening to this podcast, you're saying live, well, it started out as a live conversation on a variety of social channels. And so you could be with us live for future episodes on your favorite social channel. You can get all of those episodes, information about them, and interact with us and see them sooner. In this case, about a month sooner, by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Take your pick. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. Today's episode is brought to you by Remarkable Development Sessions. A Remarkable Development Session is a webinar for a new world, a world where people want to learn the latest ideas and powerful techniques, but want to learn them together. A world of work that is different and more disconnected than ever. We know that we learn in interaction with others, but in this increasingly fractured virtual world, the workshop experience we used to know has been shifted to a focus on simply delivering the content, leaving the application to you as an individual. So even if you love learning from webinars, you likely have thought that there has to be a better way to make a webinar far more than what it is. That's what Remarkable Development Sessions are. You can learn more by going to kevineichenberry.com/remarkable development to learn more and register for an upcoming session on a valuable skill. And with that, I'm going to bring up and introduce our guest today. His name is Ross Dawson. He is a world-leading futurist, an entrepreneur, and a keynote speaker. He is the founding chairman of Advanced Human Technologies group of companies with clients including industry leaders such as Citibank, Coca-Cola, Google, Microsoft, News Limited, Procter & Gamble, and many more. He is in strong demand globally, having delivered keynote speeches and strategy workshops to business and government leaders in over 30 countries. He appears frequently in media such as ABC TV, the BBC, the New York Times, and many others. Today, we're going to talk in part about his new book, Thriving on Overload. There it is, if you're watching, The 5 Powers for Success in a World of Exponential Information. And with that, Ross, welcome. I'm so glad to have you join us all the way from Australia.
Delighted to be with you.
So, that's one of the reasons we're doing it at this time, because everybody, if we had done this at noon Eastern time, Ross would have wanted to be asleep. So I'm so glad that we've found a time, Ross, that would work for both of us and to talk about this great book. But before we get there, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your journey in short, because I don't think you probably woke up when you were 5 years old or 8 years old and thought, I want to be a futurist. I mean, you're probably thinking more like wanting to be a fireman, right? So tell us about the journey that gets you to this place briefly.
Well, in fact, I did pretty young think that that's what I wanted to be. So probably not 5 or 8, but by my late teens, I was thinking, being a futurologist, which was the term at the time, would be something which was delightful. Just to be able to think about the future, think about who we are becoming, and the state of society, and to be a thinker, but a practical thinker, as in how it is we can create things better. So I've worked through a whole variety of different industries. So started off working in computing sales for NCR, then worked in international equity sales for Merrill Lynch, moved to Tokyo and worked for Thomson Financial as a financial journalist, and ended up getting a lot of promotions and became the global director of capital markets there. So across a number of, grew up in Europe. So I've lived in 4 continents, worked across a whole variety of industries. At the end of my corporate career, I said, okay, that's enough of that, time to do my own thing. And since then have been working around the world, been able to try to lay out this, I suppose, positive vision, contributing to however I can to both for all of us to think more about the future and be better equipped to be able to create a better future.
Okay, so before we get into the great ideas in the book, tell us something that we should feel great about when we look to the future.
I think there's many things, and one of the we will be fulfilling more of our potential as humans, and so this is partly that we are amplified by technology. So if we think, humans are the most extraordinary thing in the known universe, the human brain, what it is we are. And maybe there are some more extraordinary things, but we haven't come across them yet. So the humans are incredible, yet we are amplifying our capabilities more and more with technology. The issue in looking at AI is not so much, I believe, the race against machines. It is how machines are complementing and supporting our capabilities. And that includes amplifying our cognition, our ability to think effectively, but also in many ways, if we use it well, our ability to amplify our intent, to achieve more with our ideas, to spread them. I mean, as in, just in a small way, as you and I do by being able to be heard by anyone around the world, whatever it is we are saying at any moment in time. These are all ways which we are amplifying who we are. And that, I think, is then an opportunity to show the world as individuals and as a society, as the human race, the positive things that we can achieve.
I'm glad I asked that question. I hadn't planned to really. I'm glad that I did, because I think it's a great way to step in to this book, because while I don't think you wrote those words in the book, at least I don't recall them, having heard you say that, I believe this book enables that vision. And so we're going to talk about this book and the amount of information that we have to deal with and sort through and utilize and all that stuff. But the title of the book is Thriving on Overload. So I think we ought to start with that word overload. And maybe this is a bit presumptuous, but how do we tell if we are info overloaded?
Oh, so, well, we are. We are.
So that's what I said. It's kind of perhaps a bit of a strange question, but I think it's worth thinking about.
So the point is, we are overloaded, as in there is too much information. And this, I wrote an article 25 years ago titled "Information Overload: Problem or Opportunity." Information overload was very real then. And actually, in fact, there are some wonderful quotes from monks hundreds of years ago bemoaning the fact that there were just too many books to read, and how could they deal with it all. So if we are overloaded, we have more than enough information. Our brains are limited. We're incredible things, human brains, but they are limited. But the amount of information is unlimited, effectively. So we are overloaded, but the difference is between overwhelm and what I describe as a sense of abundance, where it is our mindset, it is our attitude around that degree of information. yes, we are overloaded. We have far more information we could possibly deal with. And we can let ourselves be overwhelmed by saying that. How could I ever keep up with that? There's just way too much. I just get lost in all of it, and it's too much. And so there's sense of overwhelm, which leads to negative responses, both emotional, neurochemical balances in our brain. We start to flail about and feel overwhelmed by the amount of overload that we have. Or we could say there's unlimited information, which means that I have all of the information that I could possibly want to achieve my objectives. And so there is this sense of abundance. So the overload is real. It is just a fact. But we can have a sense of overwhelm, or we can have a sense of abundance in this world.
And I love that, because I'm guessing there are people who pick up the book or are listening to us now, and when they hear the word overload, they immediately think overwhelm. And yet that's not what you're saying, and nor is it what might have been a better way actually to frame my question. But it's the book and the ideas in it are all about saying, okay, this is this wonderful opportunity. And so how do we go from there? And the subtitle of the book frames the promise of 5 powers, 5 things that we can use to help us deal with the abundance, if you will. And so we don't have, and I'll just tell everybody, having read the book, that we could spend our entire time on any one of these 5. And we're not going to do that. But I do want you, Ross, to lay out the 5, and then we might pick on a couple of them a little bit deeper here. But just tell everybody what the 5 are at a high level before we get going.
Absolutely. So the first one is purpose. We need to know why we want to deal with information at all. So we need to have some idea of what it is we want to achieve. What are the objectives? What it is we, broadly in our lives or just specifically in our work. What is our purpose? What do we want? Why is the reason that we engage with information at all? And without that guiding light, it's very, we can't help but get lost. The second is framing. And this is absolutely critical in recognizing that it is not just information. It's the information taking alone has very little value. It's when the information is linked together to form knowledge, to create understanding, that it has true value. So framing describes the frameworks that we can build, the way in which we piece together the bits of information we find to build knowledge and understanding. The third power is filtering, where, of course, from all of this information that we see, we need to be able to discern, be better and better at discerning the difference between the information that is useful to us, that is valuable to us, that serves us, and that which has no value or negative value. And partly through being able to choose the right sources and the channels and the portals by which we receive information.
And I want to say more about that. But before you go on,
yes.
I think that ties us back to the purpose piece, right? Like, and one of the things I love about the conversation about purpose is it's not just like my purpose for information to improve my business or to improve my career, although those are certainly very important. You certainly talk about those, but also other things like are there passions in our lives, improving our relationships, like right on down the line. You framed, if you would, purpose bigger than maybe what people came in thinking about I got to learn about my industry or whatever. And so filtering, having that clear purpose helps us do that filtering better. I'm going to come back to some of what you were just saying about filtering, but go ahead now and give us the other 2.
Yeah, that is absolutely right. Without having a purpose, how can we filter? How can we know what is useful or relevant? We have to have that starting point. So the fourth power is attention. And one of the key insights I share here is that it's not as if we're either focused or not focused, but there are many different types of attention that we can pay. And then when we take in information, we need to be able to understand that some of these are. We may, for example, be spending time scanning the headlines. Let's get up, let's wake up, time to look at the news, all of our different information sources, and look across those and see, is there something I need to spend more time on? That's just one attention mode. And another one, which is really important, is assimilating, where we actually sit down and say, this is useful. This is a book. This is an article. This is something I need to pay attention to because it's part of what matters to me, and then spend the time to take it in. So there are a number of different attention modes that we should do and schedule those at different times. And the final fifth power is that of synthesis, of pulling things together, where we are taught so much in our educational system to analyze, to break things down into smaller and smaller pieces. That is in fact our intellectual mode, is of analysis, which is pulling things apart. And what we need today more than ever is that of synthesis, the putting of things together to see the whole, to understand where it is we are, what it is that makes a difference, and very importantly, how it is we can create a better future for ourselves, our families, our communities, or organizations, or indeed all of humanity.
And what's one of the things that strikes me about this is that oftentimes, and I'll make a comment, then you can respond. Oftentimes, say in business school or when people are learning to be a manager, there's a lot of learning around how to analyze, right, and getting good at all of that. And yet, I would submit that the best leaders, while they have the ability to analyze, of course, their greater strength is their ability to synthesize and to help others lift their eyes to see that whole, to see that bigger picture. Ross, I recently wrote that as leaders, we are constellation creators. Like the stars are all out there, but like helping people see what they couldn't already see. Comments about any of that before we go on?
No, I think that's a great phrase and a great analogy, where it's not the individual stars, it's how they fit together, or the ways in which we make sense of those. And that is absolutely, if we think about the difference between managers and leaders, the managers are, they're analysts, they have a lot of the practical pieces which they are assigned, whereas the leaders are the ones which must see the whole. If they're not, then they are lost. They're not effective leaders. But this is partly, or very significantly, a part of all of the information that we receive, information from the people who report to us, information around our competitors, information around changing markets, around changing technology, around changing regulation, around the shifting world. And all of these have to be put together and to understand the whole, to see this is an opportunity which we can take, or this is the way in which we can reconfigure ourselves, or this is the changes we need to make in order to seize those opportunities we see in front of us. That only comes from synthesis, not from the analysis which happens at the managerial level.
So I'm guessing you've heard this pushback. Tell me, and tell me your response. Okay, all of this makes sense, Ross. In fact, I really like these 5 powers. This makes a lot of sense. But man, I'm busy. I don't have time for all this. Like, what's your response to the where do I find time to do that? I think it's important. Where do I find the time?
Well, you use time to make time. So there's exercises in each chapter in the book, and some of those are quite simple, but they're really just things to think about. So I am not prescriptive in saying this is how you should do it. I'm saying these are the things you should be thinking about in order to work out how you can do it better. And so I'm not going to say this is your purpose, or these are the ways and times of day you should be paying attention, or whatever it may be. But I promise that even a fraction of time spent put into being able to think about and refine your practices on how you deal with information will not just create more time, but be able to make you a far more knowledgeable and indeed wiser manager and leader. And I think one of the things which I do, so I've created an online course which is about how to thrive on overload, and the outcome of that is creating a personal information plan. Now, this is something where the course is, of course, designed to help people do that, but people can do that for themselves. And I would challenge anybody listening to this to say, spend a chunk of time. And I recommend often 90 minutes, because that is part of the way our brain cycles, is 90-minute cycles of rest and attention. And one of my recommendations is that everybody, should, at a minimum, once per week, block out 90 minutes where there's no distractions, no interruptions, that they have one thing to do and they don't do anything else during that time. And this is something where it is a way of practicing your ability to focus. It's a way of practicing your ability to pay attention, and it you will achieve far more in that time with no distractions than you do with the distractions. So in a scope of a year, you'll have 75 hours spent on developing knowledge, creating, writing a book, whatever it may be. And I would recommend it's probably more than one 90-minute session per day. But starting point, spend 90 minutes simply thinking about how it is I could be more effective in dealing with information. Are there times of day where I should be spending time with information? Should I be blocking out a period of time for reading some books or other high value content? Should I be finding some better sources for my information? Whatever it may be. And I promise you, if you spend those 90 minutes, then you will absolutely be creating more time, more value in your life.
I want to come back to synthesis before we're done, because I think ultimately that's where we're headed here, and as we've already talked, I think that's an incredibly valuable thing for us to be able to do as leaders. But I want to talk about filtering, because while all of the chapters are extremely practical, as you've just described, I think a lot of people would love to know a little bit more about, okay, how do I pick the sources? How do I filter? How do I get that stuff to show up? So let's be a little bit more pragmatic. We don't have to be prescriptive, but a little bit more pragmatic about how can people sort of get the right stuff to show up that's going to help them best based on their purpose.
So one of the frames is thinking about what I describe as the portals for information. And so we can, for example, just go directly to media. That's what we used to do. We used to switch on a TV news or go to pick up a newspaper. We can also have aggregators, so Google News or Apple News or Yahoo News or whatever it may be. We also have feeds where we can use a feed reader to pull in all of our sources into one place. We can go to social media as a source. So each of these different portals has their own advantages and disadvantages. But one of the first things to do is to rebalance, if appropriate, what is the time which you spend on each of these. And I'd probably say the pretty significant proportion of people spend more time on social media channels as a source of information than would be optimal. And it doesn't mean that they can't be good sources of information. We design them well. But we also need to be able to say, well, which of these different portals offers me the most value? And I think one of the ways in which most people can improve their habits is to be able to set up feeds where they say, rather than just going in series to a number of different publications, I'll set up one place where they all come in. I can see all the headlines. I can filter that, and I can send those to a what's often called a read it later app. Something like a Pocket or Instapaper or other channel like that, or indeed, just some bookmarks in a browser. So to choose to put again some thought and some choice into what is the best balance of information sources, of portals, of how we bring those in, and then to consistently refine the sources that you have. And one of the wonderful, I suppose, the insights that came from all of the conversations I had with information masters in writing the book was what I describe as the rule of 20, where you're looking often for individuals that you can follow sometimes on Twitter, for example, as a source, or sometimes these are writers where you can find ways to pull those into your feeds, for example. And you say, rather than saying, let's look for hundreds of people, let's find 20 or even 10 or a dozen, whatever it is, people who collectively are going to be extraordinarily insightful on the topic that you're interested in, which could be, your area of expertise. What is the latest in machine learning? Or it could be what is happening with COVID. What is the latest insights and news on that? Where you can select a small number of people who collectively are going to provide you with leading insights, which are very likely going to be beyond what you read in the synthesis or the distillations in your newspapers, and to actively add and subtract from that list. If people
Yeah,
are
that's one of the
not,
things I loved is
yeah,
not just like, okay, now I got my 20 or my 15 or whatever, but to be continuing to look, because what you're going to find in my experience is that some of those 20 are going to be pointing to other people, and they become interesting, maybe more interesting, or
yes,
give you a slightly different angle that maybe, and someone moves down the list and someone else moves into the list. One of the things you talk about multiple times in the book where we agree is that maybe the news itself is something we ought to be careful with in terms of how much we consume. Do you want to talk about your thoughts about that and perhaps why you think that's true?
there's a lot of reasons why the news as we know it is something to take in small doses often. One of them is that news by its very nature is almost always negative. And that's partly because humans have a negativity bias. We're looking for the threats and the dangers and so on. So that's what we're attracted to. So that's what newspapers report. Another is that good things usually take time to happen. So they're not news. So if something over a space of a year or two, some wonderful things develop, that's not news. Where if something horrible happens in one day, then that is news. So the whole nature of our news is very negatively biased. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be following the news. We want to keep on top of what is happening around the world. We want to rebalance, I suppose, again, the sources. But where the flaw that most people fall down is to spend more time that they need on the news more often than they need. So one news update a day. This is all the things I need to know, and that's done. You don't need to keep following that. The frequency of updates for news has an inverse correlation with your ability to live a full, rich life where you're paying attention to the things which you really want to.
You said something in the book, and I don't think I have it with one of my marks. I wouldn't be able to find it right away anyway. Is something like, if you want to test yourself on how important the news is to you in your real life, is read something from the news a week ago and see how useful or valuable it is to you now. And I thought that was a really interesting way to think about this. And so I appreciate that. So, all that says, Ross, is that you and I are in violent agreement about that particular topic. And so thank you for sharing that thought. I want to get back to synthesis for a second. You make a statement in the book where you say that synthesis is the ultimate human capacity. Do you want to say a little bit more about that? I mean, we've talked about it a little already, but what would you add? This is a big statement, that this right here on the screen.
One of the ways in which we understand ourselves as humans today is relative to machines. So we have been extraordinarily inventive, created many things, and one of our products is what is described as artificial intelligence, something that is not able just to do things, but in some ways to think, to learn in various guises. So we have to understand who we are relative to the machines we have created and are continuing to progress. And the one thing which distinguishes us more than anything else, I believe, is that capacity for synthesis. Machine learning, by its very nature, is trained on data from a specific domain. It is applicable to a particular domain. So our ability as humans to pull together all of the facets of everything we've experienced through our entire lives, which may not appear to be relevant to what we are thinking about now, but we can make sense of, is what distinguishes us. So every Nobel Prize winner, or arguably every scientist has made a significant advance, every innovator, every creator has taken things from different spaces, different domains, and pulled those together to create a whole that didn't exist before. That is the nature of innovation. That is the foundation of progress. And that is something which is driven by humans. And all the machines that we have created are indeed syntheses of what has come before that creation. So continuing from now, I believe that as AI continues to advance, which inevitably will, that we will keep ahead of machines. We will be distinguished by our capacity for synthesis. And that is the master skill, as I described in leadership. That's what leaders do. They synthesize. And again, leaders are on every level, including being able to shape our future, collective future, is driven by this capacity for pulling together what seem to be unconnected things into something which is true, which is whole, which where we can make sense of a very confusing world.
So, Ross, I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since I got your book and have been reading your book. And as I said earlier, we could do a whole episode on each of the 5 powers. But before we go, is there something we didn't talk about, something I didn't ask that you wish I would have?
And there's a wealth to discuss, but I think the key point is that it is a choice. We have a choice around how we respond to anything in our world. And one of the most important things we have to choose how we respond is the reality of overload in our lives. Yes, we are overloaded. And our response to that really defines what it is we will achieve and how our sense of well-being in our lives. So I believe it's absolutely fundamental to make the choice to be able to respond more positive information, to use what we can to be able to drive that and make this part of our endeavors, to say, this is something where I will choose to thrive because I can thrive. We can. And I've seen that from all of the information masters that I know and I've spoken to in writing the book. So I believe that we all need to recognize there is a choice and to make that choice.
We're talking with Ross Dawson, the author of the book Thriving on Overload, and he'll get the chance to tell us about where you can connect with him and learn more about the book in a second. But before we do that, Ross, I have a couple more questions for you, and I'm going to shift gears quite drastically, actually. Sure. My next question for you is this. What do you do, Ross, for fun? I mean, I know you like your work. It's clear. What do you do for fun?
So I live by the beach, and I just about every day of the year I'm in the ocean. So it's fun, and just because I'm outside, I'm in the ocean, I'm engaged with the universe, open my eyes to things. It's just something that reinvigorates me, and I make a point of it because I don't always feel like, particularly in the winter, but it makes me feel. It always makes me feel better, and so that's it's fun. It's exercise, but it's also it's fun, and it's also an expansion of my wild. One of the other things is music, and particularly improvisational music. In fact, whilst I learned to read music, I don't. I'm not interested. I'm not interested in doing music that other people do. I'm just interested in making music and having that flow. And there is no time when that is more enjoyable than it is with other people, when you're bouncing off each other's ideas and where the music flows not from one person or group of people, from beyond yourselves. And so this is something which I do refer to in the book, this idea of the capacity to improvise. Right. And that ability is something which is extraordinarily relevant in the world in our ability to synthesize. That's the capacity to sort of see things on the fly and not think about them too much, but let them flow and to come out from yourselves. So, and I suppose the third thing I would just add is traveling, where I'm very, very fortunate, where I travel extensively for work and keep on going to places I've never been before. And it's just being exposed to more facets of the wonder that humans are, and being able to experience the cultures and the diversity of the world.
I love that. Another way that we can experience our world, one of our information sources is reading. And so I'm curious, what are you reading right now, Ross, or what's something you've read recently?
So one book I've just finished recently is The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch, which is pretty heavy going, I would say, but it's just really has changed my mind in thinking about the nature of who we are as humans and what it is we can do. And essentially, it lays out the thesis that we are at the very beginning of who we can become as humans. And if we can create dynamic societies where we continue to question and to learn and to build new models and improve who we are, recognizing we'll never be where we can be, that's the foundation for infinity. And I think that it has been very influential in Silicon Valley, amongst other places, since it was published. And that's been a strong one. And one which I'm reading right now is called The Alignment Problem, which is a really excellent look at this fundamental issue of the alignment of human interests and what you can call artificial intelligence interests. How it is that we have the machines aligned with our interests. And what I do to do that, it actually digs deeply into how are humans motivated and how it is we learn in order to be able to inform our understanding of how machines learn and are motivated in some sense, and how we can make these aligned. So I'm really enjoying that book on what I think is a very important topic.
The alignment problem, and then, of course, the beginning of infinity. So thanks for both of those. Now, the book you really want all of us to read is yours. But how can we learn more? Where do you want to point people? Where can we learn more about you and your work? Where do you want to point people? I'll hold the book up.
The best place is thrivingonoverload.com. So that has not just information about the book, but also it has the online course, which I mentioned before. It has an extensive array of resources. Got the free, you can download the introduction and very, very shortly the exercises for free. And we're sharing as many resources as possible there. And there is also a podcast, the Thrive on Overload podcast, where I interview a whole range of information masters and mistresses on how it is that they are able to thrive in the world of overload. So my mission here is just to simply lay out this thing. Yes, we are overloaded, but we can thrive on that and provide as many resources as possible. So the book is obviously a central part of that, but also providing as many other possible ways and means and to support people in their journey to thrive in this world where we are definitely overloaded.
Thrivingonoverload.com, everyone. And now a question for all of you before we wrap up. It's the question I ask you every single episode. Now what? What action are you going to take as a result of this? Maybe something that Ross said about filtering and and the sources that you might want to choose, being more intentional about that. Maybe it's something about thinking about the purposes for which you need to or want to interact with information. Maybe it's any number of things that we talked about in terms of different ways that we need to pay attention, scanning being only one of them. Whatever it is, maybe you learned something about synthesis. Maybe we challenged you to think about how you can spend 90 minutes at least once a week to get better at and really stop and think about the information that you are taking in and how to map that together in a way to synthesize it for your purposes. I don't know what your thing is, but I do know this, that if you don't take some specific action, this will have been pleasant, but not of much value. This will have simply been more information for you rather than being the source of something that can make a better life for you and your team. I hope that you will take that. And Ross, I want to thank you again for being here. It's such a pleasure to have you and for starting at a strange-ish time of the day for you. So glad to have had you and for us to have had this conversation.
It's been a real pleasure, Kevin.
And with that, everybody, we're here every week, so I hope you'll come back. If this was your first episode, make sure you come back. Wherever you're listening, you can find all of the past ones. And if you loved this and you've been enjoying it, why don't you tell someone else to join us? And if you don't know how to tell them based on where you're listening, just tell people to go to remarkablepodcast.com and you can watch or listen to episodes there, as well as finding it on your favorite podcast source. And with that, we'll be back next week. So I hope you'll be back with me then. Until then, make it a remarkable week. Thanks, everybody.